Hello, and welcome to Coffee with the Civil Conversation. My name is Zach Kleindens, and today I'm here with Rachel Little. Hi, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So, today before we started, you told me that you like books.
Yeah.
That was your big, you came up with books. I like that.
You put me on the spot.
So what's your favorite book that you've read ever?
You can't ask favorites when it comes to
Okay,
someone who
what
reads
books do you like?
Recently, I've been getting back into like the Percy Jackson series, simply because my peer mentor was rereading them. So I was like, that's a great idea. I should do that as well.
Okay, so that's actually perfect because that's sort of what I wanted to talk about today. How do you feel about books that are made into movies? Percy Jackson was made into a movie.
That was so tragic. That was really tragic, which is upsetting because I was looking forward to seeing who they'd cast for the third movie, but it was just so poorly written. Because I can get behind books being turned into movies because I think that's great for people who struggle with visualizing based off of what they read. Like, it's never been something I've struggled with, but like my little brother doesn't do as well with like connecting words and pictures together to create something in his mind. So for people like that, it's great if it's actually sticking to the storyline and not just taking the general theme or plot of the book and then doing their own thing with it. Because I feel like you have to respect the author and all the time and effort that they've put into the book if you're going to make a movie of the book, rather than taking great bounds of creative freedom to create something that's just off-brand.
And do you think that's always possible to do? Like, for example, classics like Great Gatsby, Jungle Book, they have such like, at least I know Jungle Book has kind of less complex themes. There's still a lot of book. Like there's a lot, even a smaller book like Jungle Book, there's a lot less to condense down, but it's still going to take you more than 2 hours. That's sort of what I'm saying. So like, do you think that it's always possible to make, like Great Gatsby is longer. Do you think it's possible to fit all of that into a movie and be able to condense it all down into a 2-hour time span?
In all honesty, I'd be fine with longer movies, but that's just me because I'd love to see the full thing in like close comparison to the book. But you have things like the Harry Potter series even, which while it's not completely perfect in alignment with the books, it captures the same energy and the same like feeling for the majority of like the plot line. It follows things like that are important and includes the things that are important. There's not so much that they change from the book. There are some things, but it's not like with the Percy Jackson movies where the entire plot of the first movie is different. They take away some of the key scenes that help define the characters and can't even get them to look like their descriptions do in the book. Yeah. Which is frustrating.
So, Percy Jackson, young adult, 2 examples I can think of are Twilight and The Hunger Games, for 2 more examples of movies. Twilight got some, and I think Harry Potter, what you mentioned, got some also bad press. Not bad press necessarily, but worse reviews, I think, than it was hoping to, where they tried to, like, I know Twilight, I don't remember which movies it was, but they tried to, like, split one book into 2 movies. I believe a lot of books do that, where they have all this content, but they try to sort of expand it even more, but then sometimes that, like, people look at that as, okay, now this is boring. You know, this is Breaking Dawn was the one it was.
Yeah, it's the last of both of those series that they split into 2, and they did that with Mockingjay as well, didn't they? Which is the last of the Hunger Games.
I'm pretty sure.
I think when it comes to like the final books of series like that, I don't know so much about Twilight because it's been a while, and I don't think I ever made it through. I think I made it halfway through Breaking Dawn before I just gave up, to be honest. But when it came to like Mockingjay was way more dense, like with political themes and other things that you had to keep in mind of as well that were important in like the Hunger Games universe. Same with like Harry Potter. You can sacrifice on like the whole quest for the Horcruxes, but then you lose a lot of what's important that gives like that final moment of defeating Voldemort, that like sense of relief, that sense of like victory. And I feel like because that buildup is important, the part ones can feel tedious in a sense, but you know that it's for like a greater payoff. And I think it leaves on enough of a cliffhanger that it spurs you enough to want to go, especially if you're someone who's read the books and you know what's coming next, and you need to see how that goes.
Yeah.
Like, that's enough to push someone to do it. I mean, I grew up in a generation where most people had read the Harry Potter series as that final one was coming out, so it wasn't ever really a question of going to see it. It was just a given of, are you seeing it at the midnight premiere or the next day?
So how do you feel as far as like, so, and with Harry Potter especially, how much do you think the author should be involved in creating that movie? Because like J.K. Rowling had a pretty active role, but personally I would think if an author was involved, they would want to see it as close to the book as possible. So how much of a role do you think they should have versus, say, a producer or a director once they sell the rights to because when you sell your book to a company, when you sell your book to Warner Brothers or any of those, they're going to have all of the rights, but they're going to also be consulting you. So it's sort of like you're signing that contract. How do you feel you strike that balance? What do you think the best way to do that is?
Well, this is something we talked a lot about in theater as well, with having like playwrights in as the directing is happening. I feel like as long as they're not creating an issue and like putting production back and causing issues like that of making it so you can't move forward with the production, I think it's really great to have them there, because they notice little things that are easy, like changes that don't hurt the budget, that don't put production back, that help create the scene and make it feel more whole.
So like as far as like cast selection, do you think they should be able to do that? Do you think they should be able to choose, I want this actor to play this person, I want this actress to play this person? Do you think that should be chosen by the author, or do you think that's more of a producer role? Because once again, it is a movie that the producer's saying, here's what we want.
I think collaboration is important,
Okay.
especially when it comes to art forms like that, because the author did have certain characters in mind which they could want to pursue, especially if it affects the story.
Yeah.
But it's also up to the producers and the casting directors to know what's good and who can actually do the job well and who's going to execute. So that's important as well. So I think collaboration, just as long as there's a good symbiotic relationship between the author and the people who are producing the movie, there shouldn't be any issues. When it starts to get complicated, that's when the producer has really got to step forward and push the author back, because it's not their creative works. It's in conjunction with their creative works, but they have their own separate thing. So you got to stay on track. But as much as you can, I think collaboration is really important, especially in art forms.
So how much do you think, and like, this is another thing I just thought of, as far as like when you're reading a book, say that book has, whether it's illustration or it's just illustration on a cover or something like that, how close do you think they should try to match that cover illustration to like an actor or an actress? Do you think that is something they have to pay attention to, or do you think that's something that that was just kind of like a representation that somebody had, but then we can move past that? Just for an example, just something that I'm thinking of right now. There's been a lot of examples, but one example I can think of was there's a book, I forget who it's by, but it's like a Jack Reacher kind of like a whole series of books where it's like an anthology almost of this one character. And in the book, the character is, 6 feet, 7 feet tall, like something huge, and it was played by Tom Cruise, who's 5'4" or something. Like, he's not a super tall guy. So how do you think, because we had mentioned earlier about the descriptions, but how do you think, the pictures and the descriptions, how do you think that all plays into who they pick for the act? Or if they just want to put Brad Pitt in or someone that can make the most money for the film?
I think it depends on how much they talk about the character in the books. One of the things that I remember being furious about in the first Percy Jackson movie was there was so much emphasis on when Percy first met Annabeth, and him kind of taking that moment to take in what she looked like, and that was an important bit in forming their relationship was that when
she
they
was a
first met.
blonde in the book.
She was a
correct? I was
blonde.
gonna say, yeah,
she
was
had
played by a
blonde
brunette in the
curly
movie.
hair in the books, and that was something that he focused on. Like there was a specific, like paragraph or a few lines about just like her hair.
Yeah.
And so when the author takes the time to set up those character descriptions that mean something in the books, I think that's important. But if they don't really focus on, I mean, like the height thing, that's like being 7 feet tall has got to affect the characters' relationships with people, their view on life, their experiences,
but
and
they
everything.
knew they could get Tom Cruise in, and he would make a couple $1 million for him. So I mean, that's like the balance you have to look at, I think. So can you, other than Percy Jackson, can you think of any movies that like you were disappointed, like you read the book? I mean, Harry Potter, I think a lot of people were happy with. I mean, that's one, I think, on the positive side. Can you think of any on the negative or any more on the positive that you read the book and then were, I don't want to put you on the spot.
The Pride and Prejudice movie with Keira Knightley, I think was really disappointing, especially because I watched like the BBC television series first that actually stayed really true to the book.
And they had the time.
Yeah, and then you had the movie in which she's wearing heavy eye makeup and everything, and it doesn't feel quite right, period, likewise.
Yeah.
And they cut out a lot of like important scenes that make the characters complex and not necessarily like perfectly likable, but they seem like people enough that like you know that they're not perfect, but you still like them regardless because of the choices that they end up making, rather than just, oh, they're good people, now they're together, happy ever after. It's another story like that.
So do you think television or like television series or even like mini-series where you split it like that, do you think that they are more representative of like what the book's original intention was? Or do you think that like movies do a pretty good job? Like which would you, like if you heard, okay, your favorite book ever, which you can't name, your favorite book is being made into some sort of a big production, would you rather it was going to be a movie or a TV show?
I think it depends, because some take the TV show route and then drag it out, and it adds things that weren't previously there. I never read like the Shadowhunters books, but I had a lot of people talk about that, of how to fill time, they created things that didn't need to exist, which is why I like the little short like television series that like BBC and like PBS does, because I think they do a good job with just doing what they need to do and then tying it all up with a bow so it makes sense. I think TV series can get too long, and I feel like movies of something more complex can focus more on the production value of it and like the spectacle rather than the domestic personal aspect of it. And that's just me being like a born true theater kid, caring about that type of stuff. But I don't know, I like the miniseries. They've done a lot of Jane Austen stuff, so.
BBC usually stays pretty true. Like you said, they usually stay pretty true to everything, like as far as, and even production value, that's usually, you know, that usually stays pretty true to the books or pretty true to the source material, just because I think they put a lot more emphasis on, like and I would be interested to find out how they develop like their author relationships versus how like either like U.S. like primetime TV shows do or like Hollywood movies or something like that, because I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I think that's definitely different. Another one that I just thought of, Divergent, was one they made all the movies, and then fairly sure, not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they were going to make the last, because they never made the last movie. Like they never finished that series of movies because they were going to make it into like a TV show, or they were going to try to make it into like a TV movie or like a Netflix movie or something like that, I'm pretty sure. How do you think when you don't finish a series that's finished, so you know, like with Divergent, that has an ending, you never end that. How do you think that affects somebody's view of the book? How do you think like, and to go a little broader, how do you think that when these movies come out, how do you think they affect like book sales? You know, if somebody sees a movie that's not the greatest, do you think that affects the author like selling any more of those books, or do you think it makes it, you know, better or worse?
Well, I hated Divergent, so that's a horrible example, because I hated the ending, so I didn't watch past the first movie.
The book ending.
Yeah. So I didn't watch past the first movie because I I just didn't care to see it.
Well, now you can because they never show anything.
Yeah,
It's
which
just
is,
ends
so
in
that's
the middle
great
of
for me.
nothing. Yeah.
But when it comes to that, I feel like people who only go to see like the movie versions of books weren't going to be buying books anyways. And if it's
That's a good
done
point.
well, like they will. And people who are more prone to reading books and then seeing the movies probably read the books before seeing the movies anyways.
True.
You have the few people who are in between, but I feel like it's pretty definitively split. So I don't think it affects book sales too much. I mean, there's probably statistics that show that in some way or another it does, but I've never had a friend tell me like, oh, I didn't read the book because the movie was
so
bad.
bad.
They might have used that as an excuse, but like, I know them, they don't read.
Yeah.
So like, it's just an excuse for not reading rather than saying, oh, I don't read, so I'm not gonna bother. And I've had lots of people who've read the books and it's like, I didn't like the book, so why would I go spend, I don't know, $10 for movie tickets?
Says Tom Cruise. I definitely think this is something that I don't know that you're going to solve just because like Hollywood movies are so ingrained in our culture and using source material from pop culture is so ingrained in our culture. Like, you know, using things to create these movies that aren't necessarily original. Where there are a lot of exciting like indie movies, there are a lot of exciting original movies that aren't based on, and we had done an earlier piece on this show about that where it's all the remakes and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely think books give us a couple new outlets into getting new movies, but it doesn't always necessarily ring true, I think,
Yeah.
to the actual book. Do you have anything else you'd like to say? Any other points?
I think I'm good.
Okay. No, I think this was good. I think it's important to keep talking about this stuff just because I do think that eventually you're going to see the production value having to match, like, you know, with the BBC and with the miniseries. I think that's becoming a lot bigger now that like Netflix and the streaming services have come out. I think you're going to have to see better and better content. Like, I think that's going to be important. So
Ooh.
I can tell you're excited. Well, you have to still think about your favorite book. Maybe if we have you on again, you can think about it.
I'll make a list.
Well, thank you for talking with me.
Thank you for having me.
This was Rachel Little, as we found out. Her name is not Rebecca,
No.
but her name is Rachel, and she's not writing a book or anything. This was just Coffee with a Civil Conversation. I'm Zach Kleindienst, and thank you very much.